Hello there and welcome back to our program on communication and enhancing your business communication skills. We've gone through many subjects in communication, and in this particular session we're going to continue along with making sure about feedback, looking at the feedback component to communication. Now this is a very important step, as you understand from the communication model that we've gone through. And making sure that things are actually being received and understood is perhaps one of the final parts of the communication process. Quite often we say things and we think that things have been received. We think that things have been understood. But do we really know that they have? Or have people just looked at you and you have assumed by the fact that they've looked at you that they've actually got the message? So let's take a look a little bit more closely at feedback. On the screen here, you see certain phrases. It isn't very far. I need it very quickly. That will cost a lot of money. It will not cost you too much. What do you think about these phrases? Are they clear? Actually, they are not. They are ambiguous words and they are not really very clear. The first one, it isn't very far. Well, how far is it? We don't really know the exactness of how far it is. I need it very quickly. Well, how quickly is quickly? When do you need it? That will cost a lot of money. How much money? How much money is a lot of money? It will not cost you too much. Well, how much is too much? So as you can see just by this simple demonstration, some things we think we're saying and are clear are not actually very clear at all, are they? Call me later and we'll discuss it. Well, when? When is later? Later is frequently used when we talk in English, but actually, when does later mean? When is later? 1 hour later? Today? Tomorrow? Next week? When? So as you can see, communication and words are at times quite ambiguous and quite unclear. And therefore, when that happens, we frequently get mixed up. We have miscommunication. We use statements like this every day in our lives. If you sat and listened to and perhaps recorded the things that you said in one day of your life, you would be rather horrified at the fact that you've said things very unclearly throughout the day. So frequently in our daily lives, we need to make sure that we clarify and we confirm the parts of our conversation. It's very easy to fall into the trap of saying things that are not clear. We assume people will understand and then we'll clarify them later. So why don't we just start making proper statements right here and now? So the idea is to clear up the ambiguous statements that you make in your life. If you don't begin to make clear statements and confirming statements, then it can be said that there will be a lot of misunderstanding and a lack of information that will cause problems with communication. So there's a very simple step to follow. Start being clear and unambiguous with what you say. It's quite true to say that feedback and clarification can take out the ambiguity of promises you make, agreements you sign, schedules you plan, policies you put forward, and procedures that you want to implement. All of these things need strong and clear instruction, strong and clear messages. And it really isn't that difficult to do. In this program, we're going to look at how we can ensure that feedback is very clear, so you can be a much better communicator. Now let's take a look at the different kinds of feedback that we receive. We know what communicating is about. We can send messages, but what about the types of feedback that we need to know about? There is verbal feedback. There is nonverbal feedback. That means without words. There is fact and feeling type of feedback. And each different type of feedback has a specific purpose in the communication process. If we take a look at verbal feedback first, this is the type that we are most familiar with and that we receive most frequently and we use very, very often. With verbal feedback, you can accomplish a number of objectives. You can really do a lot if you use verbal feedback. And verbal feedback is simply asking for clarification of a message. Really, just to ask simply whether it is supposed to be this or that, whether this is wrong or that is right, to ask for simple clarification. Don't be afraid to ask. It's important. If you want to make sure that the communication is understood, then never be afraid to ask and use verbal feedback. Verbal feedback also gives positive or negative strokes to the other person. And you may not be familiar with stroke, but stroke is like an acceptance, an acknowledgement of something, a feeling. So verbal feedback can be either positive or sometimes it can be negative. And it's important that we understand this right from the beginning, that feedback can take different forms, being both positive and negative feedback. Verbal feedback is also used to determine how something will be meaningful and effective for the other person. So by actually receiving this feedback, we are able to determine how effective something will be to the other person that we are talking to. So let's take a look at the first point, to ask for clarification of a message. If you want to improve the accuracy and clarity of a message during a conversation, use clarifying feedback statements, such as the following that we've got here for you to see. You could say to the other person, "Let me be sure I understand what you've said. Let's see if I can review the key points we've discussed. I hear you saying da-da-da-da, depending on the subject. I think I hear you saying that your central concern is. As I understand it, your major objectives are." So we can see that these kinds of statements are quite soft in their message, soft in their intent, and that they can actually help you with understanding the accuracy of something. For example, the first one on the top of the list, it could be that you have a member of staff who's come to you and who is finding it difficult to do something. They have a particular problem. So you, in order to clarify and be sure that the communication is well understood, you could say to that person after they've spoken to you about the problem, you could say, "Now let me be sure if I understand what you've said, da-da-da-da-da," and then you would repeat what you heard. So these are examples of ways that you can, through feedback, clarify what has been said and enhance the communication. Clarifying feedback statements can also end with the following, and here are some examples for you to take a look at. Did I understand you properly? Did I hear you correctly? Was I on target with what you mean? Were those our major concerns? Can you add anything to my summary? So clarifying feedback statements can also be a question form. So therefore you are provoking and trying to get the response from the other person. So with these kinds of statements, you really have no problem with getting the accuracy of the subject or understanding deeply what is going on. And it's up to you. It is very important that you push yourself and you use these techniques in feedback. Because otherwise you are just going to walk away from something and assume that you know exactly what's going on, when actually you should have spent time clarifying by asking questions and using these proper clarifying feedback statements. A lot of this depends on you and the way that you apply yourself when you're having your conversations. And it takes time. Here you do have to invest a little bit of time when you do speak to people. Communication is something that is not meant to be rushed through as a quick fix to anything. Communication does take time, depending on the particular problem or subject matter. So please be mindful of that. Using feedback is very, very critical in the workplace. And there's only one way to really know if the message you are receiving is the same as the message being sent. And that is by asking clarifying statements or questions, or restating the message with your own words and asking whether the other person understands you. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It might seem to you that it's a little bit repetitive, but I can assure you that in certain situations when you need to be accurate and need to be very sharp on things, it is really a good investment to spend the time to do this. Go back, restate the message. And the other person will appreciate that, the fact that you are actually taking the time to do this. Continuing on with verbal feedback. To give positive or negative strokes to the other person, this is a result of verbal feedback as well. So when a person does something positive, that behavior really needs to be positively reinforced. Simple statements such as these might be in order. The project report you did was clear and concise. Nice job. You made it really easy for the committee to understand the issues. I really appreciate the extra effort you put in. These sorts of statements are very praising statements. They are actually making the other person feel very good about what they've accomplished and making them feel positive, making them have a good feeling. So you are giving a positive stroke to the other person through the words that you use in feedback. Giving this verbal feedback in a positive way has great rewards in the end because it builds really wonderful relationships. You are doing an excellent job staying within the budget. This is another example that tells the person specifically what you recognize and appreciate. So here you can begin to understand there is no ambiguity. There is no confusion. It is extremely clear and precise. And it's also giving a positive stroke. So honing your skills is very important in giving these statements. If you find that you are giving positive feedback statements or strokes in a very timely and consistent manner, this type of feedback also lets the other person understand what kind of performance is required from them. It encourages them in a way to continue with similar performance. And indeed, it may even make them want to improve their performance and really exceed your expectations. So there is great benefit to giving positive feedback strokes to people. Encouragement goes a long way. I'm sure you realize it too. When somebody encourages you in a positive way, well, you feel really good. You feel great, and you actually want to do more. So this is a wonderful part of the communication process, when you can build up the feelings of the other person. If we look at it on the other side of things, however, when perhaps you may need to give negative feedback, and you do need to be careful how you do that. You would give it in a private and a very constructive environment. Make sure that you would not be doing this in front of other people, and I'm sure you understand that very well. But definitely make sure that the environment is set very well and that the other person is very clear about what you're saying. So a point to remember when you're giving negative feedback, apart from the environment and the privacy factor, is that try not to criticize the person directly, but look more closely at the performance. Try to ensure that you're not attacking the individual and who they are, but you're actually trying to constructively inform them that the performance is the major point of concern and that perhaps there need to be improvements there. Sometimes we can sandwich negative feedback with positive feedback. Sandwich meaning just like a sandwich. We can begin with some positive words about the performance of that person or the strengths of that person, and then perhaps we can add the negative inputs there, highlight them a bit, and then come back and again just summarize the fact that you believe that the person has potential to improve in those skills areas. We call this sandwiching. And here we have an example that you may like to follow. And you can use phrases such as this. It's obvious that you put in a lot of effort on this report. The issues are so complex that it would help if we had a one-page summary. Your work is extremely accurate, but when you come in late, it puts us all behind schedule. So here you can see the pattern that's evolving. At first you use a positive statement. For example, it's obvious that you put a lot of effort in this report. You are using a bit of praise. Then you are sandwiching it with the fact that you need some kind of shorter summary rather than a longer one. When we said your work is extremely accurate, here we are praising the person, doing a positive stroke at first. Then we are adding, but when you come in late, it puts us all behind schedule. So you are informing them of the negative feedback. However, you are sandwiching it with a positive statement. The final one here. I appreciate your help folding the brochures. Since they will be going to customers, it's important that they are extremely neat. So you're thanking the person first up for helping in folding the brochures, but you're also telling them that, come on now, we've got to make them neat and tidy to be able to send them to the customers. So this is a form of sandwiching positive with negative strokes, negative feedback. It takes a bit of practice to do this, and it certainly needs your sincere approach to it, your sincerity. Don't just say things because you need to make someone feel good and then you're going to tell them something negative. You really do have to believe in what you're saying and be very honest and sincere about the things that you want to convey to that person. So in giving feedback, it's important that you really make sure you give enough specific information so that the person can correct their performance. Don't be vague. Be very clear. Give specifics so they know exactly what the problem is. Also, during a presentation, you may use verbal feedback. By asking simple questions, you can determine whether a presentation is working or not, whether to proceed in the current direction or modify your approach. If you are holding a meeting, for example, you may need to have some questions ready so you can ensure that everybody is on track with what is trying to be presented. For example, we could have a project planning presentation. And in this instance, you would find that you may ask, after a general brief summary, something like this. Would you like me to go into the details of this project, or do you have some other questions that you'd like to ask me first? So this is clarifying along the way how your presentation is going. They're simple questions and they're very good to let you measure how your message is being received. It allows you to determine the person's present state of mind and how well they're receiving what you're saying as well. You could say something as well like this. I sometimes move along so quickly. Is it proper, or would you prefer if we go on more slowly for your better understanding? These are things that can help, and people will give you feedback. They will let you know. So we have in a presentation situation, you can begin to ask for feedback from people to help you stay on track. I quite often do this when I'm running seminars or when I'm doing presentations as well, just to make sure that everybody's keeping up and the message is there. Sometimes I will stop and ask simple questions. So we have covered verbal feedback, and verbal feedback comes in the shape of asking clarifying questions so that there is accuracy and clarity of the message, giving positive and negative strokes to other people. Sometimes you have to give good news and bad news to people, so there are techniques for doing that. And also in presentations, sometimes by simply asking questions you can measure whether the presentation is working or not, or whether to proceed in the direction that you're going or to modify the way you're handling the presentation. So here we come to the second type of feedback, and we call it non-verbal. First up, we talked about verbal feedback. And now we're going to look at non-verbal, which simply means that the message of positive or negative attitudes, feelings and opinions that you give by using your body, your eyes, your face, postures and senses. And actually you do this consciously or unconsciously. Sometimes you're aware of it, sometimes you are not aware of it. And others do this back to you. This is how we are as being humans. This is normal. We use our body, and sometimes it's just so automatic we don't really know that we're using it at all. Or we don't really know that perhaps we've offended somebody at all. Normally, a very perceptive communicator, somebody who's very sensitive to others, uses non-verbal feedback that he or she is getting from the other person to structure the content and direction of a message. So we pick up on cues. For example, we look at people and just by what they're doing, we know the next thing we have to say or how we have to change something to adapt to their feelings about what we're presenting. This can be evident in a presentation or a seminar or a speech given by somebody. Quite often the speaker will look around and notice that if people are yawning or looking at their watches, then she picks up on that information and then she will structure the next part of her message around the behavior that has been observed. Non-verbal feedback is very powerful, and as we've gone through the communication skills program, I'm sure you have begun to understand just how important it is in terms of how you manage your own self, your own particular body language. If you have positive non-verbal feedback, that means good body language, then the result is a continuing interaction of trust and credibility in the relationship. Positive body language speaks a lot. It's very loud and clear. if I can use those terms. Of course, it's silent, but it is actually very powerful. These signals that you pick up on, the signals that you hear or see through non-verbal body language, help you realize when you are losing somebody's interest. And when this happens, you can change your pace or the topic or the style of what you're saying, so you can gain back that person's interest and trust. So the thing is, always have your eyes open. It's very important to be observant. As we talked before about observation, look around you. It may prove for you to do a very silent activity one day and just not speak at all. Sit and watch and see what you observe and make a note of all the things that you see. And I'm sure that you will be overwhelmed by what you can hear just by what you are looking at. Nonverbal feedback is extremely critical in manager and employee relations. And I can't emphasize this enough. It is one of the most important skills. Communication, generally, is one of the most important skills that a manager needs to be able to use very well. Sometimes, if the relations and the communication between a manager and employee receive mixed messages, then that means that there's something wrong in terms of how things can proceed and how that working relationship can endure. Sometimes while one message is being said, something totally different is being stated through vocal intonation or body language. So the idea is to be very compatible with the words that you say and the way that you say it. Try not to confuse the receiver. Mixed messages create tension and distrust, as I have explained to you. And therefore, a person will feel that you're hiding something from them. So try to remember that being open and trustworthy in your communications is very, very important to the morale of the people in your team. It's extremely important that you can keep your verbal and non-verbal messages synchronized, in harmony. Don't look like you're in conflict. If you are happy, be happy. Show happiness. If you are angry or annoyed, then don't smile all the time, because obviously that's a conflict. So what I'm saying here is don't send mixed messages. Be open, be honest, and be truthful about what you want to say and what you want to express through your body language. As we mentioned before in the listening part of our program, acknowledgement is very, very important. And we can say that acknowledgement, being the second part of the caress model, is integral to really successful communication and to the feedback scenario. People do not want to speak to people who do not respond or show any emotion. That's really quite common sense. If you are talking to somebody and the person you're speaking to has an absolutely blank look on their face, if they are having no expression whatsoever and they look like a piece of stone or a piece of wood, then you don't really feel very good at all. People want to see feedback so they feel safe, so they feel in some ways accepted. This is a natural part of our communication ability and what we expect in communication. That's why when you look at somebody, you expect somebody to look back at you and acknowledge you. When you say hello to somebody, you do expect them to say hello back. So we look for responses. We look for acknowledgement of what we've just said or what we've just expressed. And this is a normal thing. So try to remember and be very in tune with this. If your tendency is to be a little bit rigid and perhaps a little bit unsharing of your feelings, then it might pay for you to open up and become more acknowledging in the communication process. Does that make sense to you? It makes perfect sense to me. I know that when I'm talking to people, I like to know that they are listening through their acknowledgement and affirmation of what I'm saying or who I am, just sitting right in front of them. This is a normal process. Now we come to the types of feedback, and first of all, there is fact attached to feedback. Just like we have fact-finding questions. Fact feedback is about specific data and specific information. So you are asking a specific closed question or making a specific statement of the facts as you know it and asking for clarification. So facts are very important in feedback. When, for example, you might be depending on another person's facts and they are depending on yours, both of you are depending on each other for facts, then it's critical to get and give the information exactly. There's no way that you can avoid this. You have to ensure that there are specifics involved. So fact feedback is also used in words such as the following examples that we'll take you through. Due to recent layoffs, all employees are expected to work harder. There will be a short wait for a table. Don't spend too much time on that job. In this company, we are liberal and democratic. Major credit cards are accepted. We will be visiting New York and Chicago. We expect to open our first unit there. So, if we look at these statements, what exactly do you mean by working harder? How many hours will be the overtime? Here, it's important to ensure that there are specifics in the statement you make. All employees are expected to work harder is certainly not specific. So as we look at the next slide, we see what exactly do you mean by working harder? You have to be specific. In the second example, we see the statement, there will be a short wait for a table. Now, how many times have you heard that in a restaurant? How many times have you wondered, well, how long are they going to keep us standing here? So, how long is the wait? Will we wait 15 minutes or more? Fact feedback. We need to really clarify and get the specifics. Don't spend too much time on that job. How much time should I spend on the job? Is there a deadline? So make sure, and you can see the pattern emerging here, that facts are very important. They need to be clarified. In this company, we are liberal and democratic. Well, that's a very general statement, isn't it? Where are the facts? There are a couple of facts there, but how do we know more about them? What do you mean by liberal and democratic? So when you see this statement, major credit cards are accepted, which major credit cards? There are many major credit cards. And you might end up asking, do you accept Visa? And the last statement, we will be visiting New York and Chicago. We expect to open our first unit there. Which city will have the first unit? That's not very clear at all. You need to get the facts. So you ask fact feedback questions. And then once you've got those facts, then you are more able to understand the situation and the communication process can proceed more smoothly. Now we move on to the next type of feedback, which is feeling feedback. How much personal feeling does someone's message carry? How does a person really feel about what she is saying to you? What are the underlying causes and motivations behind a person's message and her facts? Sometimes there's a lot of feeling attached to statements. There's a lot of feeling attached to issues. And so all these questions underscore the importance of feeling feedback. We are human. We attach emotions to many things that we do. And in the communication process, emotions are way up there. Most certainly, there are a lot of emotions flying around. And feeling feedback is especially important in organizations. Sometimes people felt in the old school, the old way of thinking of things and doing business, that feelings had no importance in the workplace, that you leave your feelings at home and when you get to the office, then you're bang, bang, bang into your job and you don't get concerned with emotions or upsets or things going on that can cause issues. That was the old way of thinking in business etiquette. But personal lives and feelings are becoming a central part of our work. They are involved in us every minute of every day. We bring them to work. Our feelings are not just left at home in the wardrobe to be opened up and looked at night when we get back. In the old days, however, that's what the situation was. It was expected that personal lives, feelings, and emotions were to be left at the entrance of the workplace, at home, and left outside the front of the door of the office. But we know that today this is impossible, and it's really not useful to do that. Our emotions are important. Our emotions are our signature. They represent who we are. They are a representation of what we believe and how we like to learn and live and do things. So our emotions are important. So feeling feedback is definitely now very important in organizations. Research has shown many things over the years about ways of handling organizational change. And this is happening quite frequently. You will see as things progress in technology and in industry, as new innovations arrive and things are discovered and new systems come into being, and that things change in the world, that it's quite often best to let people chat about how they feel about all these changes. Let them get things off their chest. Let them air their views rather than bottle them up and hide and conceal their thoughts and feelings on a certain change that may be happening. In your organization, it's something worthwhile considering. When change comes, let people talk it out. Let people go through it verbally and discuss it and let their feelings be aired about this change. Just the simple process of talking about how they feel helps people adapt to change. This is a very real thing. So this is feeling feedback. In your position, if change is going on around you, for instance, it could be that you are bringing in 3 new advisors to your team who will be intrinsically involved in your project work. And this is a major change. So you need to let people air their feelings about how this is going to proceed and let them talk things through. And this is feeling feedback. Organizations, as you know, are very complex, and it's almost like a spider web. It's a web of people working to achieve a common goal. Now that's very, very important. That's very, very basic. But as organizational life becomes more demanding and more complicated because of the things that are going on, it does require full commitment of each member to achieve their goals. And full commitment to achieving goals requires an environment of trust where people can express their honest thoughts and feelings openly. So to nurture this kind of environment and place where people can really express themselves honestly is a very, very integral thing to successful change within an organization. It can be said that organizations that follow this path, that actually request and provide a high level of feeling feedback, understand that the feelings of each person are critical in the communication process. This kind of organization, we could say, is one that is very open to change, that is one that is very progressive. It's one that people actually try to work for because they admire and they respect the fact that their feelings are considered. What kind of organization are you working for here? Take a moment to think about it. Is your organization one that allows more positive feedback and feeling feedback to be given and provided by the staff? Or do you find that you have to sort of hide your feelings about things, that sometimes it may not be helpful in certain situations to be open and honest about what you consider is going on? Start to think about where you are right now and how your organization may consider feeling feedback, or that they in fact do not have feeling feedback. Which do you think is good? Is it good to have feeling feedback? Fact feedback, yes, of course that is very important, and you would agree with me immediately. But how do you feel about feeling feedback? It's important to understand the feelings that are inside a message, just as it is important to understand the facts of a message. Every message we receive has got things in it. Facts and feelings both exist there. So it's important to understand these things. So we can say that feeling feedback should be two-directional. You need to really make an effort to switch off to all the distractions around you and make an effort to understand the emotions and attitudes that underlie the messages that come to you. We brought this up in one of the points back in the listening process, how you have to be able to read between the lines, not just read and listen as to the messages, but also to listen behind the messages is what I'm trying to say. So this will require you to make a very sincere effort to ensure that you can do this. And in addition, clearly project your feelings to the other person to let them know that their message got through to you at the feeling level. Don't just brush it off as saying, oh, okay, if that's what you think, then that's what you think. You should let them know that, oh, of course, well, thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you. I think I do understand. I will look at things more closely at that level. You need to really acknowledge that you've got the feeling, not only the facts, but you've understood the feelings. Here we have some candidates for feeling feedback questions. Let's take a look at the first one. Someone might say to you, I'm tired of all the politics around here. Or they may say, my last review was a joke. Or, quality is just another management fashion. Or, no one cares about my problems. Or, another organization, nothing will change. So let's take a look at each of these. Perhaps they may be wanting to hear something like this. A feeling feedback would be, how are the politics here affecting you? That is much clearer. Or, what's bothering you about your last review? This is a way of giving feeling feedback to that person who said, my last review was a joke. So you are giving feeling feedback by saying, what's bothering you about your last review? Why do you feel that management isn't committed to the quality program? This is your feeling feedback to those statements. Or, what would make you feel like the organization cared about your problems? So here you are giving feeling feedback and you are asking for clarity as well, rather than just accepting the same old question and just ignoring it. When someone says, no one cares about my problems, you could say back, what would make you feel like the organization did care about your problems? And finally, when someone sort of says to you, another organization, nothing will change. Another change, nothing will really come of it, for example. You could say, how do you feel about the reorganization? So here we have examples of feeling feedback. And through your feedback statements to the other person, they will gain a knowledge that you are feeling and you are understanding what they are trying to convey to you. We could say that fact feedback, as we've looked at, is a meeting of minds, and feeling feedback is a meeting of hearts. Fact and mind, feeling and hearts. This is actually use of empathy. Feedback is a very good way of expressing empathy and using empathy in the communication process. And when you can actually feel and experience the other person's true feelings and understand where they're coming from and project this emotional awareness to them, then this reinforces the rapport that you're trying to build. It lowers tension and it significantly builds trust. These are very, very positive things that you need to build upon as a manager in your jobs. So feedback can be a marvelous remedy. It can be a marvelous medicine in some ways to developing interpersonal relationships. When you really understand and you can really show empathy, then you will find that your communication skills will be enhanced tremendously, and people would admire and respect you for it. And supporting behaviours and non-verbal signals are also important in the feeling feedback process. All those supporting things, behaviours that go with feeling, with emotions, and non-verbal body language. So here we have some keys to effective feedback. To summarise as we end our session on feedback. You can create a wonderful communication climate. Did you know that? You really can. So these keys are really going to help you do that. So as a summary, first up, give and get definitions. The meanings and interpretations of words and phrases may differ according to different people, different groups, different societies, different regions, and there are many, many different meanings of words. So we need definitions. Make sure that you do get those and are very clear in the actual language. So give and get definitions. Do not assume. This is absolutely vital. It is dangerous, very dangerous to assume. So do not assume anything in communications. Do not assume that you and the other party are talking about the same thing. As quite often as you have experienced, you think you are, but actually you're talking about one thing and he's talking about another. You assume you are, but you are not. So therefore you need to apply different ways of feedback to ensure that the messages are clear and are on track, and united messages. Do not assume that the words have the same meaning or are automatically understood. Sometimes there are differences, as we've just highlighted. You might think that that means something and the other party says it means something else. So do not assume. Always seek to clarify and use your feedback techniques, fact and feeling, to work it out. Use more feedback and fewer assumptions to be more accurate, and be sure everybody is unique and has a different frame of reference. Ask questions. The rule is this: if there is doubt, check it out. That's something you can remember as a little catchphrase that will help you when you're communicating. If there is doubt, check it out. I have another one that I've used sometimes, and a friend of mine told me many years ago. And quite simply he said, if you don't ask, you don't get. That's another short little phrase that I keep in my mind. So here there is this common rule, this simple rule. If there is doubt, check it out. Questioning is a method of checking. And as we know, there are various ways of questioning. We have gone through those. Clarifying questions, expansion questions to elaborate and get more information, direction questions when you want to move to a new part or a new topic, and fact-finding questions when you need information. Feeling-finding questions when you want to seek out how someone's thinking about something or their opinions on something. And open questions can also be used for effective feedback. Closed questions will not give you feedback. More the open questions will do that. So ask questions. That's the rule. Next, speak the same language. And by this I mean, of course, you go somewhere, and I don't mean Greek or French. You're talking to someone in French and they're Greek. I don't mean that. What we're talking about here is don't use too many technical words for somebody who is not technical. Don't use ambiguous words that are unclear. Try to consider the language of the other person. If they're a highly technical person, they may wish to hear things in more technical jargon, but if they are not, they will be the opposite. So really try to understand where they're coming from in terms of their language and the level of their language. Put it this way, if people do not understand you, then this is going to increase suspicion and mistrust perhaps. If you use words that are highly sophisticated, for example, and that are at a level that may cause a little bit of embarrassment perhaps to the other party, then they're not going to respect you for that. They'll know that you are being a little bit manipulating or not being so very nice in the communication. So speak the same language. Talk to them in a language that you know they can understand. Next up, to be effective in feedback, stay tuned in. Now, we mentioned this before when we talked about powers of observation. Observe the other person. Be sensitive to their feelings and their nonverbal signals that they will be showing. Perceive them, pick up on them, and listen to the conversation. Don't tune out. You've got to tune in. It's like fine-tuning something to make sure that there's no static involved and that everything is clear and you can understand it. Observe the other person. Look at them. Regard them. Try to catch all you can about them. Use your gaze, use your thinking, use your powers of observation, and stay tuned in. One important aspect of feedback, and we've done this before in parts of the program, is to focus on the behavior, not on the person. And in our summing up, I'm going to say and emphasize that this is a very integral part of feedback and the communication process. This is about positive and negative strokes. And relate the feedback with the action or behavior to be praised or punished. Never direct it to the personality of the person. So look at the actual behavior rather than the personality. Give the person a chance to understand and work towards better performance. You know, they just need to know what was going wrong, and perhaps that other person will really try their very best to improve upon that performance. If you blame the fact that it's their personality or it's the person themselves that is at issue here, then they're going to take that very badly. People can change. People can improve their performance. Therefore, you need to reflect that in your ability when you give feedback. And many ineffective managers lose employees. Did you know that? Who really have correctable mistakes. people or managers have said, oh, I'm just going to lay it on the line. I don't like her anyway. She was a nuisance. She always came late. So, I'm just going to tell her that, her performance is just really bad because she's just not wanting to do the job. Now, this kind of statement is a very wrong thing. People do actually improve if they are given the opportunity, and it is up to you to make that opportunity available first. Of course, if things work out differently later, that's a different thing. But you need to understand that people can change and improve performance. So when you give feedback, give it on the behavior. Don't blame the person and their personality. You will lose somebody very valuable by doing that if you're not careful. And next up, and finally, there are times actually when it's best not to give feedback, we could say. You might have to just take a deep breath, close your mouth, and control yourself. Restrain your body language and your facial expressions in these situations. It could be that this has happened to you, and sometimes it's best just to leave things alone. So watch out. Watch the timing of things. If the timing means that, okay, I'm just going to be a little bit quiet and I won't respond, that may be the right way to give feedback. Sometimes when a person is sensitive, it's much better to postpone the process of giving feedback rather than thinking I'm going to do it right now, I've got the time now. Time can be made later to give feedback if the situation requires it. So don't always think you've got to rush in and give feedback immediately. There are moments, and you will recognize them when they come up, where you really do have to watch the timing. And the timing can prove to be a very successful strategy, sometimes in giving appropriate feedback. So in summing up, effective feedback can decrease interpersonal tension, build trust and credibility if it is used properly. There's no doubt about that, and I'm sure that you understand through our discussions in this subject that feedback is going to be one of the most important components to the communication process. If you find it's where you are lacking, where you are limited, and that you need to improve your feedback skills, then please go ahead and ensure that you follow up on that. Effective feedback, it really should be fast. Fast, we say, means frequent, accurate, specific and timely, at the right time, within the right frame of time. So try to remember this short way of knowing all the components of feedback. Frequent, accurate, specific and timely. That is effective feedback. It really is the core component in all communication, because that's what we are looking for as humans. We need to know what we've said has been heard. We need recognition, acknowledgement, and affirmation of the message we have sent. This is a natural thing. It's what holds us all together in the communication process. So it is the core component to all of our communication, and something that you must remember as a manager and an executive in business. If you stop communicating, then that's when your troubles will really begin. I do hope that this session has given you some very important guidelines on ways to give feedback, and that you understand that feedback can take many different shapes and forms. I hope that some of the examples that we've given will be able to help you as you move along in your role as a manager and as you coach and indeed communicate with groups and individuals and customers as well. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in our next session.